I'll just start by telling you a bit about myself, and then Joe will tell you a bit about himself. We're probably going to do this predominantly Q&A style. So after we tell you guys a bit of our biographies, I'll probably ask you a bit about yourselves and what you hope to get out of the session, so that we can figure out how to be most useful to you. As you guys know, probably digital media is always changing. What it means different things to different people. So I'm not going to pretend that my answers to every question are going to be the same as Joe's. And that's just the nature of the beast. So the top line things about me are me and Joe are both Nieman fellows this year. I've spent most of my all of my career at HuffPost and then at Vice. At HuffPost, I held a huge number of jobs. Including like I worked on the business team, the technology team, sports team, entertainment team, and then I was a politics reporter. I've covered a number of topics as an editor and reporter, so I'm comfortable answering questions for people who are interested in either job. And then at Vice, I covered politics and the economy as a features editor, kind of doing a bit more involved stuff. Sorry if there's a cop car that you can hear in the background. Just to tell you, that's my top lines. I'll tell you a bit about how my career went in reality. Hopefully this car goes away. So I graduated about a decade ago and was interested in media, had no connections, hadn't done college newspapers or anything like that. Moved to New York on a whim after working at a PBS affiliate for a year and saved up some money to do that. And I worked as an intern simultaneously at HuffPost and at a website called Salon. Did 2 internships, do not recommend doing that simultaneously. And got hired from that position to an associate business editor and sort of moved up the ladder. So I consequently feel strongly that I wish retrospectively that I did a bit more in the way of networking and prioritize that a bit more. But I can also speak about entering the industry without those connections and tips in that regard. So I think those are the basics. And if people have topical interests and they have, related to one subject or another, I'm happy to talk about that a bit more, but I'll let Joe tell you a bit about himself.
Great. Just happy to be here with you guys. It's so weird, having been a student journalist at various points to be on the other end of one of these things. And if I sound very old or out of touch, you have to tell me so I can adjust accordingly. I should first say you're really lucky to have Maxwell here because he has thought really deeply about the sort of economy of digital media. I'm someone who's worked in digital media for most of my career, but and I'm more than happy to answer anything about my experience, but I don't think I have the same kind of like structural view of it as Maxwell. Anyway, I'm Joe Bernstein. I'm a Nieman Fellow. I've spent my fellowship year pursuing a study plan about the nature of alienation online. When I'm not doing the Nieman, I'm a senior reporter at BuzzFeed News, where I write feature stories about the intersection between tech, politics, and culture. I spent the past 7 years at BuzzFeed, or 7 years before the beginning of the Nieman, where I was, I believe, employee number 148 in a company that eventually grew to well over 1,000 people. So I really had a front row to the sort of rise and subsequent difficulties of the company, its explosive growth in the mid 2010s and the sort of retrenchment over the past few years, although it did, of course, just or recently purchase Huffington Post. So I think it's kind of coming into a new phase. I've worn a bunch of hats at the company. I came on in 2013 as a reporter covering the gaming industry. Then I worked as an editor on the tech desk before building out my current beat over the past 5 years, roughly correlating with sort of the rise of Trump and Trumpism. Despite the difficulties of the layoffs and a company culture that isn't perfect, my time at BuzzFeed has been overwhelmingly positive. I've worked with fantastic journalists. I've learned an enormous amount about how to write stories that succeed with a digital audience, and I've done work that I'm proud of. And, you know, as we can both say, given the uncertainty in the industry in general and in digital media and specifically, I feel very fortunate for my experience. Maxwell and I yesterday when we were chatting about this said, it's very unlikely that the industry you enter in a couple of years is going to look like the industry we're in now, or certainly the industry we entered in the early 2010s when I was closer to your age. So I thought I'd start by giving just 4 very brief pieces of advice that I've gotten over the years or that have served me well. And then like Maxwell said, I think we'll just sort of open it up to questions. I should also say, if anything I say sounds completely nuts, it's because I got the second Pfizer shot yesterday, and I currently feel like I'm on the moon.
I don't think you can blame it entirely on that, to be fair. But go ahead.
Yes, I'm also a little insane, but maybe I found my niche in academia. Okay, these are just 4 things that I think are valuable for any journalist, but specifically given the sort of uncertainty and flexibility required in digital media, these are things that are really helpful. The first 2 things I think are important. Developing your own style. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn how to write. I mean, as I'm sure you all write very good news stories, like flat news stories. Because digital media is new and changing, and people come from a lot of different backgrounds. Like when I started at BuzzFeed, we had people who had always been digital. We had a lot of newspaper people. We had magazine people. We had people from the trades. I think there's still quite a bit of room to like develop your own style and like have a stake in what writing online sounds like, particularly as these companies shrink or change, and you see the rise of these kind of places like Substack. I think it is important, if that's something you're comfortable with, to develop your own sort of writing style. Corollary to that, and probably more important, is developing your own expertise. I have had the luxury of doing that on the job, and to an extent, I think Maxwell has too. But if you know something really well, and you know who to talk to, and you know how to frame issues for people, I think that's something that is just an easy way in digital media, because all of these digital media companies have weaknesses, and they're looking for people who have specific expertises. I mean, I'm thinking of this sort of many years of BuzzFeed trying and failing to hire the right business editor and the right business reporters, because the infrastructure to hire young business reporters just wasn't there, because those people were drawn either to sort of topic focused digital outlets or traditional business outlets. The other thing that's important, and you guys are natives at doing this, is cultivating an audience. I didn't have a Twitter before I started at BuzzFeed, and the first thing that the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed did when I sat down was make me sign up for Twitter and put TweetDeck on my second monitor. I have a love-hate relationship with that site. It's like a big time waster for a lot of people, including myself, but it's also a place where I now have an audience. And the audience, you know, one of the bargains of digital media is they take your work, but you get to keep your audience. And if that audience is on a third platform, it is something you get to take with you. Be flexible. Feel free to experiment with what you're doing if that's economically feasible. I didn't want to be a gaming reporter when I came to BuzzFeed, but I basically was young and I had a friend who said this company is going to do well. And to that extent, I got very lucky, but also, this is maybe something I would have told myself when I was in journalism school. The right job for you isn't necessarily or the job you think you want isn't necessarily the right job for you. Which is kind of a weird thing to say when I say develop an expertise. But I do think that taking chances, especially in this sort of landscape, is valuable. The last thing I'll say, which goes hand in hand with developing an expertise, is I was not really a hard news reporter before I came to BuzzFeed. I didn't have a lot of experience. I had reporting experience, but I did not have hard news reporting experience, really. And I learned how to do it at BuzzFeed. Again, I was very lucky to learn on the job. I think the news industry goes through cycles where hard news and analysis are more and less important or more or less valued. But I do think that nugget of hard news travels. It's time consuming and expensive, but the way BuzzFeed essentially built itself as a news organization was doing, sort of micro scoops about the late Obama administration and the 2012 election. So I do think like remembering that the coin of the realm is new information is like a thing to keep in mind at all time, particularly when you're not associated with a brand that, and frankly, how many brands are there that have the kind of inbuilt like credibility and legacy of like a New York Times or Washington Post. So that's kind of my spiel. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Maxwell. I'm really interested to hear from you guys, really interested to know what you're interested in, and, any sort of questions. There's nothing too stupid. As I'm sure you guys know, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I realized when you were speaking that I didn't say that. Yeah, I've studied the effect of Silicon Valley on the media for quite a while, and the venture capital industry. So, like Joe said, I've thought a lot about how those industries have broadly affected and changed the one that we're in right now. I just want to make a couple comments, and then we're happy to answer any questions or do whatever would be useful to you guys. I find this idea that digital media is siloed a little silly these days, because if you enter the industry, you'll find that all media is digital media. So the New York Times is a digital media outlet now, predominantly. The idea that it's a newspaper or predominantly was dead 10 years ago. When I think of the concept of digital media, there are a lot of really useless things that people say, but I think it comes down to two things. One is that for better and worse, digital media and the sort of analytics era have made you intimately knowledgeable about your audience, what they want, how they react to stories, what type of stories they're more prone to read, how long they read them. We just know a lot more about what the audience craves, the sort of vegetables that the sort of candy that they're more prone to, and I think the upside is that we've gotten better as journalists about learning how to write and produce stories that are of journalistic value, but also grab the reader in a better way. The other thing I'd say about digital media is that it is a very experimental field relative to the sort of traditional newspaper industry, and that is seen as a very valuable skill internally. If you're a creative person, I think it's quite a good time, editorially speaking, to enter the news industry. The other thing I'd say is, compared to 10, 15 years ago, something that I think is a positive about the digital media industry is that reporting, like Joe kind of made reference to, real genuine reporting, obtaining of exclusive information by any means necessary, is at a premium right now compared to a decade ago. And I think in that regard, it's a good time to be in the industry. And it's also a good time if you're able to get a gig to enter it, because you can be doing interesting work more quickly. Let me think. A couple more things. I mean, the industry is also in need of a lot of change. Primarily, if you look at me and Joe, it's too white and it's too male. And there's a real desire amongst a lot of people, I can't say all, to change the demographic makeup of the industry. So that is something that is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now. I don't know. I'm looking through my hastily written notes. The last thing I'd say is that, like Joe said, our story likely won't be your story because the industry changes so fast. But what I can say is that when you're trying to enter the industry and when you're looking at jobs, I would not think primarily in terms of what outlet you want to work for at the outset. I would think about what kind of work you want to do and what's creatively fulfilling to you, and trying to find a job that allows you to do that, rather than going, I want to work at the New York Times or I want to work at ESPN. if you're able to get a creative job at those companies, that's wonderful. But there is a downside to trying to get an internship or a job at an organization that I don't know, where you really are just like running around getting people coffee. So I would just be mindful of that. So we've talked a little bit more that I'm comfortable with. I was wondering if we could go around really quickly and everyone could say their name, and you can answer any of these questions. Why you're here today, what got you interested in journalism, what kind of work you want to do, or just how we can help you today. Any questions that you're looking for. So if you don't mind, and you can say your name or age or any sort of biographical information, just be easier for us. So I'll start with Maymay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Maymay. As I said before, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, but I'm a freshman at Harvard College and a labor beat reporter for the Harvard Crimson. The reason why I got into journalism was because I joined the high school newspaper as a freshman, and then just because I wanted to write, and then I realized I actually liked journalism, and it's kind of stuck with me ever since. And let's see what the other questions were. The kind of work that I want to do, I'm pretty open to any type of work that involves writing at this point. I don't really want to close off my paths, which is why I'm here. And I guess one of the questions that I have is regarding, I guess, ethics and how you balance wanting to engage your audience and, having access to what your audience likes and what grabs your audience attention, but also trying to keep in mind, what stories are maybe not, commonly sought after, but may still need spotlighting. So yeah.
That's a great question. Maxwell, maybe I'll take down the participants' questions and we can kind of roll through them one by one after everyone introduces themselves. Oops.
Sure, you just disappeared, but
I know.
Is that format work for you guys? Sure, okay. I'm arbitrarily picking names. Lauren, will you go next?
Sure. I'm Lauren. I'm a sophomore at Boston College. I'm currently the deputy managing editor for The Heights. And I would say I'm here today because The Heights has recently undergone a bunch of transformations and sort of reimagining what our role on Boston College's campus is. And so I'm here, I guess, just to learn more about how we can expand and continue to grow to better serve our readers. And I guess one question I have is, with growing online presence for different news outlets, The Heights, for example, has a website, a weekly newsletter, social media presence, and we've been expanding our multimedia recently. How do you continue to get your audiences to engage with yet another digital platform without taking away from ones you currently have?
Can you just explain that a bit more so I can make sure that I understand?
Sure. So, for example, The Heights this year decided that we were going to stop printing weekly and are instead going to provide a weekly digital edition. And I guess I'm sort of wondering how we can continue to get our audience to engage with that while we already have a website and a newsletter and sort of other forms of online presence.
Interesting. You know what? I'm gonna. Why don't we take both of these questions, because otherwise I think we're gonna forget them, or at least
okay.
I think I might be guilty of that. To start with Maymay's question, I mean, that is such an important question. There is no exact answer to it. It is the critical question that we grapple with every day in journalism. The desire amongst the audience to, for example, know what Donald Trump tweeted is disturbing and really boring journalism. I think no journalist really wants to do that. I think that over time people have gotten better about understanding where they can add value. I think I would say two things. One is that the way to think about it is you have the story that you want to tell, that you know is important, and you need to think about in journalism, what is the most engaging way to make this story accessible to a large audience? So the problem of, you know, Florida man doing X, like there's always going to be interest in that story. I can't say that that's not going to be the case. What I can say is that there have been more aggressive moves to package stories that are of societal value in ways that grab readers. Labor stories, I can tell you there's immense amount of interest actually in labor stories amongst the audience. I think what has gone away, and you probably see this if you look at the New York Times website, is there was an old view in the industry that important stories for some reason had to be boring. They had to be packaged with a boring headline, very overly self-serious, unengaging, doesn't grab the reader, boring art. You'll see now more often that important stories are packaged in a way that is much more engaging, much more conversational. And so I would place the emphasis there. I can't say that, like I said, Florida man's story is going away, but I do think that there has been a real emphasis on making, you know, jobless claims, an engaging story, I think the coronavirus coverage nationally has been pretty engaging and conversational a lot of times. And so I think that's where I would place the emphasis on that question. I don't know if Joe has any thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great question. Like Maxwell said, it's constantly shifting. It's going to be, first of all, it's going to be different everywhere between outlets. And that's okay. I think that's a good thing. ProPublica is going to have a different answer to that question than Huffington Post, for example, is going to have a different answer to that question than like a student newspaper, which is a much more sort of discrete and understandable audience. One thing I would say is that the combination of different legacy expertises and conceptions of what an audience is has combined with the era of audience analytics, as Maxwell alluded to create a pretty a kind of a medley of understanding how, like, what the audience is. So you have these sort of legacy ideas of the audience as like the Pulitzer Committee, which again, Maxwell kind of alluded to, like writing important stories in a very dry way to hit a certain number of notes to get a prize. You have people who are completely data obsessed and are just trying to maximize traffic. Although I think in general, traffic per se as a way to sell ads is just not the way the industry has trended over the past few years. And so I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was a leaked memo from Insider the other day. Did you guys see that?
Yes.
Maxwell, you didn't see this?
No, I did see it.
Oh, okay. Basically, you know, what it reflected in some ways was a kind of exactly what I'm talking about, which is this kind of different ways of measuring what an editor will call impact. So different editors are going to care about different things for different stories. Some editors won't care if a story gets read at all, as long as the right 3 people tweet it. But the days of kind of thinking about your audience as a you know, as a kind of imagined thing, or like a ideal public or something like that, or an ideal New York area public or an ideal national public, those days are basically over, just because we know so much more about the audience now. And there are significant bad incentives, as Maxwell alluded to knowing more about your audience. At the same time, journalism doesn't exist without an audience, and I think it's a mistake to correct too hard in the other direction and say we can't learn anything from what people are interested in. Yeah.
I would just add real quick, and then we'll move on to Lauren's question. Sorry, Lauren, we remember you. We see you. As I was just like, I think, for example, I think ProPublica has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years at packaging their stories. Obviously, ProPublica is one of the best investigative outlets out there. I was just looking, ignoring Joe, I was looking at the ProPublica website, and I think that they've become much better at writing and packaging important stories in more engaging ways. So I think that anyway, I just wanted to add that. To Lauren's question about, I'm trying to figure out the best way to summarize it, how to not lose your audience by moving to different platforms.
Products,
Is that how you would
basically.
say, Lauren? Yeah. I think there's no reason to move away from an audience if it's working for you. There's a reason that newspapers still exist, and there's a reason that New York Times continues to put out a newspaper. But I think being deliberate about how your audience is consuming that news is critical. And so I think, for example, in your case, I would think that decision was made to drop the print and go to digital. I would think that that was based off of your audience consumption habits. I think I might have misheard, but I think the question was, how do we make a weekly big splash or something like that differentiates from the news site on the daily? Is that kind of what you were asking, Lauren?
I think so. Like, how do we incentivize our audience to engage with this like digital edition if we already have a website in which they can sort of already get this news?
Yeah,
I mean,
let me just say one thing and
Yeah,
I'll let
yeah,
you
yeah.
go, Joe. The way that I would, I mean, it's difficult, and I don't think you should see it as either or all the time. Like, I think that it would be a mistake to say if people are going to see these stories on the website, our packaging has failed. I think that it probably comes down to something pretty old school, which is just really good reporting and good stories. That the best way to make a splash in a new product is to hold your guns and publish something really big regularly on a schedule that the audience knows every Friday at noon or whatever, especially in a local pub.
Sorry, my internet cut out. Did you kick it over to me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo what Maxwell said. Like, I don't think people are as interested in like the delivery mechanism as we are. Like, no one says, with a very small maybe number of contradictory examples, like, I just downloaded the coolest new news app, or like the coolest new news product. I think the content is like what's most important, and giving people the same content on two different, I think your question is a difficult one, because if you are being redundant, you're being, so like Maxwell said, I think establishing certain kinds of stories on certain platforms. I'm sorry, that's my dog losing his mind. Is key, and like having something that people associate with a new product. The other thing is, like, at the end of the day, my test for anything I'm working on is always, would I read this? Like, am I interested in this? And if you design something that looks great, and I mean, digital, to Maxwell's point about experimentation, BuzzFeed, the idea was throw a million things at the wall and see what sticks. If you spend a lot of money on a product, but there's nothing unique that makes people want to read it or look at it to watch it, it's kind of unnecessary. So not to say that there's not real virtue in experimenting with new formats, but Maxwell and I have been in the industry long enough to remember, like, there was a point where the industry was going to be totally reshaped by iPad editions. It was going to change the entire industry. And what happened to that? And this is 10 years ago. So it's a complicated question, and I don't think you need to find the answer. But like, to Maxwell's point, the content I really think is the most important thing.
Sorry, I don't know if this is like a terrible way to do this, but I am interested in hearing from all of you. James, do you want to go? Do you have and if you don't have a question, I don't care. I'm just interested in who you guys are.
Sure. I'm James. I'm a junior at Harvard. I'm managing editor of the Crimson. I was curious to come to the session because the I think I'm interested in a very similar note to Lauren's question, but sort of I think on the other side, which is the newsroom side, sort of the creating kind of a culture and a production schedule and kind of a just moving sort of mentally in the direction of being a digital first outlet rather than a print paper. So at the Crimson, for example, we haven't been printing a print paper over the course of the pandemic, but we've still been sort of in the print production mindset in terms of, we edit our stories in the evening and we, put them up at night when we typically would be flowing them into print pages. So I don't think it's necessarily been a problem or anything, but it's just sort of, we're still in that print paper mindset. So I guess if you have any, curious if you have any thoughts about kind of transitioning more into a digital first workflow and just newsroom culture.
Well, I would. My first question to you would be, where do you think these are young people who are presumably digital natives? Where do you think the reluctance is, or do you think that it is in fact some sort of structural issue, like kids can't dedicate the time during what it would be normal work hours?
It's definitely in part that, and yeah, I mean that's sort of a college paper inherent thing, but I think that there is something structural to it, because it's just sort of been the established model, and it's what people are used to. But I do think that the pandemic has offered us some of the time and the sort of freed up some resources to take on some very digital focused projects, like more emphasis on podcasts, video, things like that. But that's just been kind of like because people have time, because they're not, making it, laying out pages or taking photographs or something. So it still hasn't been necessarily, I think there's a lot of innovation that could happen.
James, how often do you write a story, or just the Crimson publish a story that's competitive with another news outlet?
Probably fairly often.
Right.
Depends on the story, but there's still some stories where we do publish breaking news during the day.
Right.
Typically,
so,
any story that we're competing on.
Right. So to an extent, some of this, like the content solves the problem for you, but you are in a unique position that like you say, is inherent to being a college newspaper, which is you kind of have a monopoly on your audience, and on the stories that your audience is going to find interesting from you. And I would imagine the other publications on campus very much define themselves vis-a-vis your publication, like the alternative in X, Y, or Z way. So I mean, part of it is like, what do you want to improve? I mean, what is the aspect of your publication schedule that you think could be better?
I don't know if it's necessarily about the schedule or anything like that. I think it's more about what people are kind of focused on, I guess. And I think that goes towards Lauren's question as well, in terms of the product that we're putting out. It's still it still feels like people, the goal ultimately for people is to get, at this point, people are, it's sort of like to get your story into the next day's newsletter, which we have a daily newsletter. So sort of what the print, what the ultimate, product is that your story is being packaged into. And then that could also include, whether people feel, how people feel about seeing their product come out as like a visual story, or like something other than just words on a page.
Yeah, so I think dealing with journalists who are difficult people, probably as you guys know, I think you have to show them why it benefits the root journalism. I don't think that saying we want to be a digital first publication is good. I'm not saying that you're saying this, but I know that outlets have said that before. We want to be more digital journalists. I don't think that message works with journalists because it doesn't tell them how it's going to benefit their reputation, how it's going to make it a better publication. I think, like Joe is kind of leading to, I think showing what you guys are missing as a publication by not being more digital focus. If you are missing stuff, if you are missing stories, missing scoops, or becoming less central to the way that students at Harvard or more broadly read the news, if you're becoming less relevant, then that is a real concern and something that I think any journalist would be sensitive to. If I think maybe this is implicit, but I wonder if part of the reason that there's a reluctance to be more digitally minded is because there's still a prestige in being in print, being a part of that newsletter that isn't as available on digital. If that's the case, that might be a design issue, honestly, with your newspaper. And I certainly know that there are journalists who, especially when they put a lot of work into a big feature, which I know the Crimson does, they want to feel like their work matters. And so I think that creating an environment where digital pieces look good, feel great, you can take real pride in the presentation, I think that matters a lot to reporters. The other thing I'd say is if people are reading it, regarding the newsletter that you guys put out daily, if people are still reading the newsletter, there's no reason not to prioritize that still. But if they aren't, and it's becoming something that the primary reason is because it makes the journalists feel good, then that is a different conversation. But generally, I think you should message to reporters and editors less like we need to be digital and more the audience isn't here, it's over there. We want more people to read the story. If we're 4 hours late on this story, it doesn't matter how well it's written. People aren't going to be as interested in it, and giving them more specific incentives than just this sort of broad mandate that I don't think the typical journalist will really care about as much.
James, I'm curious, over the pandemic, has your newsletter readership gone up?
Yeah, it actually has, and we've been happy about that. And I think that's a good point from Maxwell, that it's maybe more about sort of the language and the way we're conceptualizing things. There's inherently always going to be that difficulty of, college students can't necessarily write during the day or whatever. But yeah, I think that incentive of the competition and there's people love the kind of adrenaline of breaking news too. So.
Of course.
Yeah, and you have an amazing inbuilt advantage, which is that like things that happen at Harvard are often de facto national news. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Maxwell, should we move on just so we hit everybody?
Yeah, very cool that you're doing that. Shraddha?
Hi, I'm Shraddha. I'm a sophomore at UC Davis, and I'm the assistant editor for City News at the California Aggie. And I'm a CS major, so I guess I'm interested in pursuing the intersection between technology and writing, as well as potentially diversity journalism. And I guess the question I had was, you mentioned the importance of cultivating an audience. And so I noticed that with a lot of digital outlets, a lot of them focus on technology or business fields, and the vocabulary or the way they present their articles can often be very niche. And so the average reader who isn't well versed in these fields might not understand them necessarily. So I was wondering, how do you identify the type of audience you're aiming your articles for?
That's a good question. I think Joe actually would, I'll let Joe go first because I know he's covered tech.
Yeah, it's a huge question, Shada, and thank you for it. It's a big question that, I'll try and sort of nibble around. Tech coverage, with exceptions, for a very long time was enormously niche. It was for enthusiasts, essentially. And as contemporary technology, particularly digital technology, has sort of wound itself into politics, into culture, it's increasingly become something that can't just be covered as tech, qua tech. So the first thing to think about is, who is your audience? If you write for The Verge is an interesting publication and one I have a lot of respect for, because they both write for enthusiasts, people who really care about gadgets or developments in the tech industry, like narrow developments in the tech industry, but they also write great investigations that win prizes and are sort of just about tech, very broadly defined. So there's a real conversation, I think, that's happening right now about whether the sort of frame of tech as a beat, even, how applicable it is. I think increasingly reporters who cover politics, culture, labor, to another beat that was mentioned earlier. What's the biggest labor story of the year? It's a tech story. Biden actually has been interesting because he hasn't been as much of a tech story, for better or for worse. But I think the first thing to do is figure out who your audience is, and then you write to that audience. I mean, if your audience is a general audience, you need to make them understand. There's an interesting thing that happens with tech where, of course, there's the novelty aspect of it, which people often think is news, just because that's sort of how our brains are wired. And I think reporters have gotten a lot better at not confusing the two, or at sorting out when new things are newsworthy. And part of that is like, who is your audience? And part of it is what kind of publication do you want to have? Do you want to have a publication that speaks to a really broad group of people about the way tech is changing their lives? Or do you want to speak to a sort of more narrow enthusiast group of people who maybe understand the coverage on a deeper level? Does that help? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, I just add that, a lot of tech coverage is actually masked trade coverage. So and so is a lot of business coverage. So, like, to use an example, Bloomberg is an excellent outlet, I think, but they their core audience isn't us. Their core audience is people who work on Wall Street that need to make financial decisions based off of the news that they read on the Bloomberg terminal. So they consequently have to write their articles in a certain way, and they're writing with a certain assumed level of knowledge so that people can read it quickly. I will note that Bloomberg, like I was saying earlier, is trying to become more digitally friendly for their unpaid content that's available on the web, although I think they have to wait some X amount of time before that coverage can be placed on the web, so that people have an incentive to buy the Bloomberg terminal. So, but the other thing I'd say is that, this is more basic journalism knowledge, but when you're talking about a tech company, you really have to talk to, or a business, or annual earnings or anything like that. You really should explain it like you're talking to a friend who knows nothing about it. And there are a lot of insecure journalists, adult journalists, who would like to feel smart and frankly not very good writers and don't know how to disentangle that language a lot of times. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, to your point, a ton of tech coverage, because these companies are so huge and it's very hard to understand everything they do on a technical level. It's very easy for journalists to get spun because they have very sophisticated, basically propaganda arms. It's just a fact that if you cover a big tech company, you're going to spend a lot of time talking to flacks from those companies. And to Maxwell's point, the single greatest weapon you have to strip the propaganda out of what they're telling you is plain language. And not relying on the kind of whiz bang, like, oh wow, isn't this technologically sophisticated, what's essentially corporate propaganda.
Yeah, people, I mean, Flax will tell you if you don't use technical knowledge, you don't understand what you're talking about. And so I think that there's a unfortunate incentive to sometimes sound a little bit, to use this jargon to sound like you're part of the club. Also, I went to a UC school, so represent. Okay, I want to make sure we get to everyone. Megan?
Hi, my name's Megan Kelly. I'm a sophomore at Boston College. I'm the news editor at the Heights here. I guess I joined journalism. I joined my high school newspaper, like most of us probably did, and just haven't really been able to stop since. I've just kind of been going. And I suppose I'm here because I want to learn from journalists in the field and also people in other college newsrooms. And my question, let's say you have like an important story. Sometimes people just don't click on it, and not that our quality is measured by views, but obviously you want people to read your story. And, you know, aside from visually engaging aspects of a story like graphics, photos, even a video, etc., how can you differentiate and grab an audience's attention with a tweet, a post, an article, whatever, just in this vast sea of everything they're scrolling through on Twitter?
I mean, the best piece of advice I've ever gotten about packaging is literally what is the most interesting thing in your story. Unless it's just like a complete throwaway detail, in which case you're probably in trouble no matter what the case is. What is the most interesting thing about your story? Sit down for 5 minutes with the reporter, identify that thing, write it in a declarative sentence, and 9 times out of 10, that's a tweet that people are going to notice. I know that's very simple advice, but it has helped me enormously over the years.
I think Joe is right. One thing I'd say is, similarly, when I was doing a lot of packaging stuff, we would always talk about like, okay, this story, you know, it's really important. There's a lot of information in it. Turn away from the story. Don't look at it. You're talking with your friend in your dorm room or at a coffee shop or whatever. What is the one thing that you would say, the one nugget of information that would stand out to you that really, like, conversationally illuminates the significance of the story or the fact that really stuck with you? That should probably be how you're packaging it, because that's the way that you're going to grab someone conversationally online. I do think one of the problems with talking so much about packaging, headlines, art, these things are critical. I still think the most critical thing is the first 3-4 paragraphs of your story. Quality writing is the best packaging you can have. If your story isn't good enough, if it isn't actually as revelatory as you think, if it needs more reporting, that is often the biggest issue, and no amount of packaging can really hide that. So I know that sounds boring, but the truth is like a lot of these digital tips and tricks, like, they're useless unless the reporting is there and unless the quality of the writing is there. So there are people in audience development who disagree with that, I think, but you know, that's it. Oh crap, we only have 5 minutes.
All right, lightning time.
Julia, you haven't gone yet, right? Okay.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a sophomore at Boston College. I'm the associate news editor at the Heights here. I think you've kind of covered all the topics I'm curious about, so I don't really have any specific questions, but I'm similar to Lauren in just that I'm here to learn more about how to best serve our campus with our transition to a fully digital publication. So thank you guys so much for being here.
Sure. Simon, I know you are an inanimate face, but I figure I just double check to see if you have any questions or anything.
Yes, I am indeed here.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess one question for me is that I've had a lot of just traditional news experience, just like writing articles, and then I would see like the multimedia team like plop a photo or a design on top of it. And one thing I've seen is that a lot of the most engaging features in like articles online have like such a big emphasis on infographics and interactives. And I just wonder like how, as I guess like a general reporter, I can involve myself more in that like process of like deciding how to creatively like I guess visualize around just the narrative that I've written, right? It's like, how do I collaborate with the other like designers and editors and so forth to like make things more visually appealing as someone who just writes the article?
You know, I've really seen starting my career in print media, sort of as in internet magazines, where you have literally no control over what runs next to what you write. And then at BuzzFeed, sitting really close to the designers and like getting to know them. And like, honestly, this is a case where relationship building can really help. Like if the designers like you and you know them, and they have a good sense of what kind of design that you like and that you think is helpful for your story, like being on a like a good basis with the people who visually package the story, whether that's designers or it's like you know, data journalists, having them like and respect you is a very important thing, because if they don't think that you're important, or like you think that they're not important, that's a really good way to get art. Yeah, in my experience.
Communication on this stuff is really important. Like Joe said, I do think that the writers themselves often do themselves a disservice in thinking that they don't have good ideas. Particularly at Vice, we had actually really good and reactive artists who did most of our feature art. And I found that often you can be a really good artist, but maybe you don't understand the crux of the story in the same way that a writer does. I think oftentimes I'd find that, and I would think, this is super obvious, you know, the story is about, you know, people feeling pressure to go back and work during coronavirus, you know, and it's about, you know, hairstylist or something like that. And it would seem obvious to me that the art would be accurate. And I'd come back and the art would come back and I just go like, this doesn't really capture it. And it doesn't mean that they're a bad artist, but it means that I've probably spent about 7-10 times as much time thinking about this as the artist has conceptually. And so I think not being afraid to kind of say, that's not quite right, is important. In terms of infographics and graphics, I do think you have to think a lot about the incentives of the designer versus the incentives of the reporter. This doesn't go for all designers, obviously, but the best graphics are often, I think, quite conceptual and often a bit simpler than people think. I do think that occasionally there are designers who, you know, they want to put their best foot forward and do something really complex. And sometimes I just find that those don't really serve the reader as much and are kind of difficult. You're like, what am I looking at? I guess this makes sense. So I think it's important to work with the designer or the artist from the outset. I think another thing I'll say is that in that regard, your biggest mistake is going to be letting the designer or the artist, leaving them alone and sort of not talking to them from the beginning, because it is a lot of legwork to do that sort of stuff. And understandably, they can get really frustrated and pissed off if you come in at the 11th hour and you say, this isn't what I was expecting, you know? So I think clear communication from the outset and throughout is really important. So I guess that's mostly what I'd say. I do think that there's a move towards more simple design and graphics. I remember, you know, when was it, Joe, that like there was like the New York Times snowflake piece that was so complex and so beautiful and just totally useless, I thought.
I don't even remember what the story was about. I just remember the like insane thing to scroll through.
Yeah, I mean, it was so beautiful. It felt like, and there was this sense of like, this is the future of news, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But not many people used it. And so I think that thinking about how does our audience actually work? Maybe it's a bit simpler, especially on mobile a lot of times. So anyway, that's kind of what I think. I don't know if that's useful or not, but those are my thoughts on that subject.
If you guys want to look at great design, I think it's a completely separate part of Bloomberg, but Bloomberg Business Week, I think is very funny, very clear, both on desktop and on mobile. I think they just do an amazing job.
Yeah, so just to swing back to what I was saying at the beginning, I do think it's a really cool time in digital media, but I don't think that digital media means BuzzFeed and HuffPost anymore. I think that the rules that were created at those places apply in a lot of a lot of other outlets as well, Bloomberg, ProPublica, and New York Times, we talked about. These rules are applying everywhere. And to be honest, I think they're being applied better now and with a bit more care, and in a way that it's not just about grabbing the reader and getting a page view, but instead thinking a bit more conceptually about how can we make people care about this technology story? How can we make people care about this labor story? And so I think that is an exciting opportunity. And I think that you guys have an opportunity to do even better job than we have. I hope that we're still in the field, but please hire us when you guys are running newspapers in about 15 years. So just kidding. Are there any other questions or anything like that?
I have one more. And
okay, let me just say, if people want to go during this question, they're free to go, but happy to answer any questions.
I guess, from your experience at BuzzFeed, and this is something that, I've wondered about. Obviously, like, there's a big segment of the audience that kind of, or, maybe it's different audiences, but people who just kind of see BuzzFeed as like, the site for like quizzes and like things like that, like sort of the more, I don't know what you guys call it internally, but like, the sort of not news content, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then obviously it's on the same website package with the news. So I'm kind of curious about how like that kind of concept, like I know it's like, it brings in a lot of readers, obviously, and then maybe they go to the news articles, but I don't know if that's like something you think about a lot.
No, you've put your finger on something that has tortured BuzzFeed from the beginning. It was started essentially as a widget within Huffington Post to measure how fast a story was spreading on social media. And so getting traffic in certain ways, being obsessed with traffic and what people want to click on, it's just part of BuzzFeed's DNA, and it's stupid to deny it. When I started at BuzzFeed, there was no distinction between hard news reporters and people who made content. 55 chips that look like potato chips that look like Barack Obama, whatever. And in fact, I was encouraged to not just write news stories, but if I had an idea for like something crazy, like a list or something like that, just like write it. And so I think like a lot of the confusion is just genuinely baked into like how BuzzFeed started and how it told like plenty of experienced reporters just like write whatever the hell they wanted within reason. That said, I think within that broader context, people who like are even a little bit sophisticated about news do draw a distinction between, or I hope they do anyway, between the kind of credibility of, some of the reporters and some of the work we do. And which is not to say that people who write like buzz content, which is, I guess, what we call it, are not credible, just that they do something that's, kind of has a different purpose. The other thing I would say is like, as I said in the beginning, you have a certain, as like a journalist these days, unless you're someone who is very secure in a long-term job at a major news outlet, part of the credibility that you bring to a story is your own personal credibility and how different people feel about you and what you do. And that doesn't derive, BuzzFeed can be an easy way for someone to dismiss a story that I've written, but it's not, I don't know. I don't see it as something that's been a hindrance, certainly not for the past 4 or 5 years.
Can I just add that this question of news versus buzz, or whatever terms you want to use, is an interesting window view into how advertising works.
Oh yeah.
It's this perpetual question of reach versus brand, and all the reach in the world isn't going to make you a highly profitable media company if you don't have some sort of brand heaviness. And that's one of the big lessons, I think, of the last 10 years. I do think, especially regarding Lauren's question earlier, and working on these publications where you're trying to get bigger, more and more attention. Ben Smith, who was Joe's boss, came into BuzzFeed. It was only doing, Barack Obama potato chip content at that time. And he had, from what I understand, he said everything that I want almost everything that we publish to have exclusive information in it. Everything has to have some bit of exclusive information. If another outlet has done it, we're not doing it. There's no point in doing it. And I think that was a really critical distinction that BuzzFeed did, that frankly other outlets like that I was a part of did not do. And I think that gave them a lot of brand recognition. And I think that they also went for really big stories. And I think the biggest way to give your brand credibility and recognition is to just do the journalism and to find exclusive information instead of trying to compete on different levels. Like I remember Katie Baker writing that, or she got the letter that the Stanford victim published exclusively before everyone else. It was a huge story. I mean, it was really well packaged, and it was also really touching and horrible and great journalism. And I thought that model of aggressively finding your niche, no one was covering that story really at the same level that Katie was. And I think that's a really, really good lesson that BuzzFeed kind of is given to other small publications. And one big story can really change the reputation of your paper. So,
which for better or worse happened with BuzzFeed in that that dossier we published. But just to reiterate some of the things Maxwell just said, the context at the time was like aggregation. Everyone was aggregating and trying to outpackage each other. This may be ancient history to you now, but there was something called the curiosity gap, which was between the extremely sensational promotion and the actual meat of the story. And I think BuzzFeed did, for the most part, stay away from that. And like Maxwell said, Ben's charge to the troops was I don't know that we never followed other people, but certainly go after the biggest stories possible and write articles. Katie Baker's story is a great example that other publications would want to publish and that they have no choice but to acknowledge, which is easier said than done. But also, I think there was a generation of digital journalists back then who just felt like they de facto couldn't compete, or like they were doing something that was different and less serious. And I think that distinction to an extent has dissolved. But that's an important thing to keep in mind. What you guys are doing right now is important, and you can, did I freeze again? No. What you're doing right now is important, and you can find stories that reporters at the New York Times and Vice and BuzzFeed will be jealous of. You can do that. There's nothing stopping you. And that if there's a good lesson of the past 10 years of digital journalism, I do think that's one of them. There's nothing stopping anyone from doing good journalism.
Yep. I am officially ending the session. Okay, this was really fun. I hope we said something useful over the last 65 minutes. So I really appreciate you guys coming, showing interest. And again, please hire us when you guys are running the industry in a few years. I'd really appreciate it. So thanks again. Really, honestly, it was really fun.
Bye, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.